On October 14, 1953, a forest ranger named Elias Cordell walked into a stretch of Appalachian wilderness the local maps called Bitter Hollow. He carried a service revolver, 3 days of rations, and a leather-bound field journal. He did not carry a radio because the ranger station did not own one that worked in that valley. 9 days later, a search party found his campsite. The fire had burned down to white ash. His rifle was leaning against a birch tree, still loaded. His boots were placed neatly at the mouth of the tent, laces tied, and his journal was open on top of his bedroll, weighted down by a flat river stone as if he had wanted someone to find it. Elias Cordell was never seen again, but the last page of that journal, the one he wrote the night before he vanished, was not entered into the official record. It sat inside a sealed evidence envelope in a county archive in eastern Kentucky for 68 years, and when a local historian finally opened it in the winter of 2021, what she read did not describe a lost man. It described a man who knew exactly where he was going, and what was waiting for him there. And before we go further, I need to pause for a second, because what I'm about to tell you gets significantly darker. And I realized a while ago that some of this cannot be fully explained. In a video format, the complete reconstruction of the missing ranger's final testimony, the transcribed field journal pages, the county archive intake log, the witness account word for word from the historian who unsealed the envelope, I put it all into a written document. It's linked below and the QR code is on your screen. Now let's continue. To understand what happened to Elias Cordell, you have to understand what Bitter Hollow actually was. On the modern maps, it doesn't exist. The name was struck from the state survey in 1961, replaced with a bureaucratic label, Section 47, unincorporated. But in the older maps, the ones drawn by hand in the 1880s and stored in the Perry County Records Office, Bitter Hollow is clearly marked. It sits in a narrow bowl between two ridges, about 6 miles from the nearest logging road. The bowl is roughly 2 miles across. There is a creek that runs through the centre of it, and there is something else marked on those older maps that does not appear on any modern survey. A structure, a single small square, drawn in ink near the eastern edge of the bowl. The map does not label what the structure is, but the surveyor who drew it, a man named Harlan Beecham, made a note in the margin. The note reads, "Older than the trees, do not enter." Beecham drew that map in 1884. He was 51 years old, an experienced woodsman, and he had walked every ridge in Perry County. He died 2 years later of what his death certificate calls exhaustion of the nerves. He was 63 at the time. His wife told the local doctor he had stopped sleeping. She said he would sit at the kitchen table at 3 a.m. drawing the same square over and over on scraps of paper. Elias Cordell knew about Beecham's map. We know this because in his journal, in an entry dated October 8th, 6 days before he walked into the hollow, he wrote about it directly. The entry reads, "Spoke with Mr. Whitley at the courthouse today. He allowed me to examine the Beecham survey. The structure marked at the eastern edge corresponds to a location I have visited twice this year. On both occasions, I felt strongly that I should not approach it. On the second occasion, I did approach it, and I regret that I did. I'm going back to see it properly. I have made my decision." Cordell was 34 years old. He had been a ranger for 11 years. His supervisor described him in an interview after the disappearance as the most level-headed man I have ever employed. He did not drink. He did not exaggerate. When he filed a report, you could set your watch by it, which is what makes the next part of the story so difficult to reconcile. There is one more piece of context that matters before we go further, because the Beecham map is not the only place the structure appears. In 1907, a geological survey team from the University of Kentucky spent 2 weeks in the eastern half of Perry County, cataloguing rock formations for a state report. The team leader was a professor named Josiah Hardwick. His field notes were donated to the university library after his death in 1934, and they contain a section on Bitter Hollow that was never published. Hardwick writes that on the third day of the survey, his two assistants refused to continue working in the eastern portion of the bowl. He does not say why. He writes only that both men, who were graduate students in their 20s, requested to be reassigned to a different section of the county, and that when he pressed them for a reason, one of them wept and the other simply said, "Professor, please." Hardwick completed the survey of the eastern edge himself. His notes for that day are brief. He writes, "There is a small clearing near a bend in the creek. In the clearing there is a wooden structure of unknown age and construction. The door faces east. I did not approach it. I do not recommend that any future survey approach it. I have decided not to include it in the final report. Let the map show forest. That is what a man sees if he is fortunate." Hardwick's field notes were rediscovered in 1998 by a graduate student who was writing a thesis on early 20th century Appalachian surveys. The student, whose name is not relevant here, mentioned the passage to his advisor, who told him to leave it out of the thesis. He did. But he made a photocopy, and that photocopy eventually reached Margaret Whitley in 2020, which is what prompted her 1 year later to walk down to the county archive and ask to see the Caudle envelope. The entries in Caudle's journal from the 6 days between his conversation at the courthouse and his walk into the hollow do not read like the writing of a level-headed man. They read like the writing of someone who has decided to do something he already knows will kill him. On October 9th he wrote, "Dreamt again of the structure. It is not a cabin. I have called it a cabin in my notes, but that is not what it is. It has no door on the side facing the creek. The door is on the side facing away from the water, which is not how any man in these hills would build a shelter." On October 10th he wrote, "My mother came to visit today. She does not know why I asked her to come. I wanted to see her face. I told her nothing. I do not want her to remember me as afraid." On October 11th he wrote a single line. "The stones around it are arranged in a pattern I have seen in one other place. I will not write where." On October 12th he wrote nothing. On October 13th, the day before he entered the hollow, he wrote the longest entry in the journal. And it is this entry, the one sealed in the county archive for 68 years, that changes what this story is. Before we move on to the sealed entry, stop for a second. What you just heard about the days leading up to Caudle's disappearance is the part that changes everything. But it only makes sense when you see it written out next to the original journal transcription. The exact dream description, the stone pattern reference, it's all in the document linked below. Take 5 seconds right now, grab it, and then come back, because what comes next builds directly on it. The link is in the description. QR code is on your screen. The entry from October 13th, 1953 begins with a description of the weather. Caudle notes that the temperature dropped 9 degrees between 4 and 5 in the afternoon, and then a low fog came up out of the hollow, which he says is unusual for that time of year. He then writes about his supper. He ate a can of beans, half a loaf of bread, and drank coffee from a tin cup. He notes that the coffee tasted metallic and that he poured the second cup out. Then, without any transition, he writes this: "I have thought about this for a long time, and I believe now that the structure at the eastern edge is not a building at all. I believe it is a door, not a door in the sense of a piece of wood on hinges, though that is what it appears to be from the outside. I mean a door in the older sense of the word, a passage between one condition and another. I believe that the men who built the road through this valley in the 1830s knew about it. I believe they went around it on purpose. I believe the reason there is no proper trail into the hollow from the western ridge is that a trail was cut and then deliberately allowed to grow over. I have found the remains of that trail. It ends about 400 yards from the structure. Whoever cut it stopped there. They did not stop because they were tired. They stopped because they had come far enough to see what I saw the second time I approached it." Caudle then describes what he saw, and this is the part of the entry that the sheriff's deputy who first read it in 1953 refused to enter into the record. It is the part that the county coroner, a man named Dr. Ambrose Kell, personally sealed inside an envelope and marked with the words, "Do not open," in his own handwriting. Caudle writes, On the second approach, in late September of this year, I came within 60 yards of the structure. The light was failing. I saw the door on the far side. I saw that it was open. I did not see anyone standing in the doorway. I saw instead that there was no interior. The doorway framed a view of the forest behind the structure, but the trees in that view were not the trees that stood behind the structure in the physical world. They were older trees. They were larger. The ground beneath them had no undergrowth. And in the distance, through those trees, I saw a light. It was a small light, low to the ground, the colour of a lantern flame. It was moving. Not toward me, not away from me. It was moving in a slow circle, as if something was walking around something else. I watched it for perhaps 30 seconds. Then I turned and left the hollow without stopping, without eating, without sleeping, and I did not stop walking until I reached my own porch, which took me 2 days. The entry continues. Cordell writes that in the weeks following that second approach, he began to notice things in his own house that he could not explain. Small things. His mother's photograph, which sat on the mantel, would be turned to face the wall in the morning, though he lived alone. The wood stove in the kitchen would be warm when he came home in the evening, though he had banked it in the morning and gone out. And once, in the middle of the night, he heard the sound of a lantern being set down on his porch. He got up. He opened the door. There was no lantern. There was no one there. But on the boards of the porch, in the fine layer of frost that had settled during the night, there was a circular scorch mark the size of the base of a lantern, still faintly warm to the touch. Cordell writes, I understood then that whatever I had seen through the doorway had also seen me. I understood that it was patient. I understood that it would wait, but it would not wait forever. I have decided to go back. I have decided to go alone. I have decided not to tell my supervisor where I am going because I do not want anyone to follow me. If I am wrong about what I believe, then I will come out of the hollow in 3 days, and I will burn this journal and speak of it to no one. If I am right, then someone will find these pages, and they will know what to do with them. I do not know what that is, but I trust that the person who finds them will know. The entry ends there. There is no signature. There is no date at the bottom. There is only in the margin a small drawing. The historian who unsealed the envelope in 2021 photographed it before she did anything else. The drawing shows a doorway. Through the doorway there are trees. Between the trees, low to the ground, there is a small circle. And around the small circle, drawn in a lighter hand, as if Cordell had added it after some hesitation, there is the outline of a figure. The figure is not fully human. The proportions are wrong. The arms are too long. The head is turned to face the viewer, though the body is turned to the side. And the historian, whose name is Margaret Whitley, the granddaughter of the same Mr. Whitley who showed Cordell the Beecham map in 1953, said that when she first looked at the drawing, she had the distinct sensation that the figure had not been in the drawing a moment before. The search party that entered Bitter Hollow on October 23, 1953, found Cordell's camp near the creek, about a mile from the structure marked on the Beecham map. They did not find Cordell. They also did not find the structure. The lead searcher, a deputy named Roy Halloran, wrote in his report that the ground where the structure should have stood was undisturbed forest floor, covered in leaf litter that had been accumulating for what he estimated to be at least 40 years. There were no foundation stones, and there was no clearing. There was nothing. Halloran also wrote something else in his report, which was later redacted before the report was filed. The redacted line was recovered by Margaret Whitley in 2021, using ultraviolet light on the original document. The line reads, "We could not remain at the site after nightfall. The dogs would not enter the area. 2 of the men became disoriented and had to be led out. I do not intend to return." Halloran kept his word. He never went back into Bitter Hollow. He resigned from the sheriff's department 4 months later and moved to Ohio. He died in 1978. His widow, when interviewed in 1994 for a local history project, said that her husband had one recurring nightmare for the rest of his life. In the nightmare, he was standing at the edge of a clearing. There was a small cabin in the clearing. The door of the cabin was open, and someone was standing just inside the doorway, waiting for him to come closer. She said her husband would wake up from this nightmare and go sit on the porch, no matter the weather, no matter the hour, because he could not bear to be inside a room with a door. The county coroner, Dr. Ambrose Kell, sealed the final journal entry in an envelope on October 30th, 1953, 3 days after the search was officially called off. He wrote a short note that was filed with the envelope. The note reads, "The contents of this envelope describe events that cannot have occurred. However, the man who described them was not, in my professional judgment, given to invention. I do not know what to do with this document. I am placing it in the county archive with the instruction that it not be opened for 50 years. If it must be opened before that, it should be opened by someone who has personally walked the eastern edge of the hollow at dusk. They will know then whether to believe it." Dr. Kell died in 1962. He never spoke of the case publicly. His own diary, which was donated to the County Historical Society after his death, contains one entry that references the Caudle case. The entry is dated November the 2nd, 1943. It reads, "I have not slept properly in 8 days. I do not think I will sleep properly again. There is a light on my back porch tonight. It is not mine." Margaret Whitley opened the envelope on February 4th, 2021, 68 years after it was sealed. She was 59 years old. She had grown up hearing about Caudle from her grandfather, who never fully recovered from having been the last person outside of the search party to speak with him. She had walked into Bitter Hollow twice as a young woman in the 1980s, and both times she had turned back before reaching the eastern edge. She has not said publicly why. In her account of opening the envelope, which she recorded in writing and deposited with the Historical Society, she notes that the paper of the journal pages was still faintly cold when she removed it from the envelope, though the archive room was kept at a steady 68 degrees. She notes that the ink of the drawing in the margin appeared, under magnification, to be fresh, though the paper itself was demonstrably from 1953. And she notes one other thing. When she photographed the pages and enlarged the photograph on her computer that evening, in the margin of the second to last page, she saw a mark she had not seen with the naked eye. A small faint word, written in pencil, in Caudle's handwriting. The word was, "Hello." Margaret Whitley has not returned to Bitter Hollow. She has said, in the one interview she has given about the case, that she does not intend to. She was asked whether she believes what Caudle wrote. She thought about the question for a long time before answering. Her answer was this: "I believe that he saw something. I believe that whatever he saw is still there. And I believe that the reason the structure was not there when the search party arrived is not that it had never been there. I believe it is that the door had closed." She was asked whether she thought the door could open again. She said, "I think it opens for certain people. I think Elias Caudle was one of them. I think he knew that when he walked in. And I think he made his peace with it, which is why he placed his boots outside the tent and weighted his journal with a stone and left his rifle leaning against the tree. He was not lost. He was not attacked. He walked through the door on his own. He wanted to see what was on the other side." The final page of the journal, the one Margaret Whitley unsealed in 2021, is now stored in a climate control case at the Perry County Archive. It is not on public display. Access is restricted. The staff will not explain the reason for the restriction. But the intake log for the archive, which is a public document, contains one entry that has drawn the attention of the small number of researchers who have looked into the case. The entry is dated 3 weeks after Margaret Whitley opened the envelope. It reads, "Page condition check performed on Caudle document. Margin drawing has changed. For figure now closer to doorway. Recommend further study suspended until cause is determined. No further studies have been performed." The archivist who wrote that log entry requested a transfer 2 weeks later, and she has declined every request to speak about what she saw when she performed the condition check. The document remains in the case. The case remains in the archive. And somewhere in the folds of the Appalachian Ridges, in a valley that no longer appears on any modern map, the ground where a small structure once stood remains covered in leaf litter. undisturbed, quiet, and waiting for someone to walk to the eastern edge at dusk and see for themselves whether the door is open. If this story stayed with you, and if the idea of doors that open only for certain people is something you want to understand more deeply, the next case is already waiting on this channel. It sits inside another sealed archive in another quiet county, and it involves a name that has been struck from 3 different maps in 3 different states. Watch it right now while the thought is still fresh. Some stories are much easier to walk away from than this, and this one, as Elias Cordell learned on the night before he vanished, is not one of them.